Okay, recording. Hi everyone, it's me again with Microeconomics Tutorial 3. The stuff that is... give me a sec here. Yeah, so you see here it's due by the 17th of February, which is this Friday. And I only realized it now on Wednesday. I meant to do it on Monday, but I just forgot. So too bad. So we're going to do it now. Give me 1 second. I need to go grab a tissue. I'm just over here. Alright, let's get started then, yeah? Okay. So, first of all, we want to look at our question here. Now, if you want the quick answer, B and A, those are the quick answers for you if you want to quickly go for those. But let's explain it a bit further. So, for question 1 in part A, we have a family of 3 can afford a package holiday to any of these 3 holiday locations, either Florida, Georgia, or Hawaii. A bit American-centric, but alright, fine, whatever the fuck, shut up. The father prefers Florida to Georgia to Hawaii, the mother prefers Georgia to Hawaii to Florida, and the child prefers Hawaii to Florida to Georgia. They decide that the family weekly refers one package X to another, Y, if and only if the more family members prefer X to Y than prefer Y to X. Okay, so here's the deal. And then it also says, which of the following statements is true with regard to suggested family preference relation over the 3 holiday packages? Briefly justify your answer. Now, here we're talking about completeness and we're talking about transitivity. Now, completeness is defined specifically by the fact that if I'm given like 5 options, I can rank those 5 options. That means I have complete preferences. Transitive preferences means my preferences don't go in a loop, you know? I prefer X to Y, but I also prefer Y to X, That doesn't work unless I'm completely indifferent, which would not be the case if I had a preference. So that's not the case. So let's look at completeness and transitivity. First of all, completeness. Here, completeness is satisfied. Every single person has a preference relation for every option. This means it's complete, okay? So we can say completeness is satisfied. So it's one of the top 2, okay? So it's either A or B. So we know it is B because we know it's not transitive. Now, how do we know it's not transitive? Well, graphing out, hold on, I'm about to, pardon me, having soft drinks at this time of the day is not good for me. Anyway, if we sort of write out our preference relation. So for the father, we've got F, weekly preferred to G, weekly preferred to H. For the mother, we've got G, weekly preferred to H, weekly preferred to F. And child, H, weekly preferred to F, weekly preferred to G. Okay? Now, it says here, only if more family members prefer X to Y than Y to X, then we'll weekly prefer it. So first of all, let's try F to G. Okay? Do we weekly prefer F to G? Well, the child weekly prefers F to G, and so does the father. Okay, and the mother doesn't, but then again, 2 outweigh 1, so F is weekly preferred to G. Now what about weekly preferring H to F? Well, the mother and the child agree, and the father disagrees, but that is the majority, so we weekly prefer H to F, which means we now have a relation H to F to G. Okay, so we prefer H over everything else. However, what if we compare G to H? Well, the mother and the father both prefer G to H, right? So G is preferred to H, which is preferred to F, which is preferred to G. And this comes to a problem here. H cannot be preferred over G and also preferred under G at the exact same time. Because imagine it, I like H less than G, but I also like it more than G. It doesn't make sense. So for that reason, it's a loop. And we have violated transitivity here. So, A1, the answer is B. The family preference relation is complete, but not transitive. Okay, so hold on. Is someone knocking at my door? Give me a second here. No, it isn't. I must be having auditory hallucinations again. It's that time of the month. Anyway, so an individual so we're on to question 2. An individual has preferences over 2 goods, Q1 and Q2, described by the direct utility function, okay? Also, a good thing to note here, direct utility functions have a U and indirect will have a V. Just something to note. Okay, now we have this function here, Let's zoom in a little, just so you guys can see the details. So we have q1 to the power of alpha and q2 to the power of beta. And we know that these two are above 0. And yeah, we also want... Okay. The question tells us, in order that preferences should be convex and homothetic, which of the following would need to be true of the parameters? Now, the answer is A. But why is it A? This is where we get it's sort of a tricky thing. First of all, okay, these two at the bottom here, C and D, would give you quasi-linear preferences. If you remember the definition of a quasi-linear preference relation, it would sort of just be a linear variable next to a function, okay? I think that is included within number 4 here. It's somewhere here. Is this it? There it is. If we were to look at quasi-linear... Oh, is it within here? Quasi-linear? Yeah. Quasi-linearity. Oh, dear God. No, it's not in there. Maybe it's in here. Bit of search. Yeah, here we go. So, it gives... I think it does. Does it give an example of quasi-linear preferences? I swear it does at some point. Do excuse me. Yes, here it is. Sorry, I completely skipped over it. If there exists a utility representation of UQ such as UQ1 is equal to just the variable plus a function, then the preferences are quasi-linear. Now, if we're quasi-linear, we're generally not homothetic in any regard, because quasi-linearity is sort of a kind of a different thing where we're moving, specifically in one direction. So that doesn't really work. So we can say that C and D don't really work. Of course, if you looked at this in more detail, it wouldn't work either. So we know that both of them... Yeah, okay, so practically speaking, I've done the mathematics here a bit more, so you can look at that. But yeah. So the reason they have to be equal is also that to prove homotheticity, you need to prove that the MRS is constant along a line coming out from the center. Now, a useful way of doing this is just imagining, for example, okay, let's say the line we're going out from the center from is Q1 equals Q2. It's a bit like Y equals X, okay? And we want MRS to be constant along that line. Now, if I'm on the line Y equals X, well, I can replace every Y value with X, right? So we're going to do the same thing here. If I'm on the line Q1 equals Q2, I'm going to replace every Q1 with Q2 and just make it easier for myself. So that's what I've done here. And then once you've cancelled these out, it'll give you an expression. Now this should be a constant. And here, the only thing limiting it being a constant is the power here, alpha minus beta, okay? Now this would only be a constant if this were to equal either 1 or 0, really. Yeah? So if it's equal to 0, it's fine. If it's equal to 1, it's fine. So if it's equal to 1, then alpha, well then, it's sort of a trickier one. No, actually, no, sorry, no, I'm completely false. The only way this is a constant if it equals 0, because if it's 1, then Q2 can still vary and change it. No, sorry, it has to be 0. So alpha minus beta equals 0, right? So they must be equal to each other. That's how we prove homotheticity. Now, are they smaller than 1 or larger than 1? Well, they are, smaller than 1, practically. Okay, because if we go for... Okay, now if you remember now... I think I'm being a bit too complicated, but shut up, whatever. So we've proven homotheticity. Now we need to prove convexity. Now to prove convexity, you need to show that the MRS is always shown to be negative, basically, which I have misspelt, and I've just realized. Negative, I see. Right. So we basically have to show that, okay, it's always going to be negative whenever we sort of are going along. And in this case, we can see it's negative as long as the alpha and beta are going to be larger than 1. Because if they're smaller than 1 in this case, then, the exponentials, not the exponentials, the powers become decimals, first of all. Wait, no, they don't. Do they? No, they become negative, basically, which means we're going to have 1 over Q1, 1 over Q2 for certain amounts of powers. And that is going to be a relation where it just doesn't really work. Oh, wait, no, under 1. Oh, no, I am right, yeah. So it's going to become negative, and given now we're going to get a decimal instead, then we're just going to sort of... It just turns into a mess, basically. You can, I think, maybe try doing this a bit further. I think there's a more rigorous way of doing it. But at the very least, this is always going to be negative, so it's always going to be convex. Therefore, alpha equals beta, which is smaller than 1. So it's B, A. They said B. It's A. It is A. Okay. Moving on to part B. So part B, obviously, a lot trickier, because question is longer. Okay. That's the rule, you know, in life. The longer it takes to ask the question, the harder it is. It's not right for politics, but you get the idea. So, first one. Consumers in a particular economy have preferences between fish and chips. Jesus Christ. Could we make this any more, like, generically British? Yeah, we're picking between fish and... No, but no, they should be compliments, shouldn't they? They're not fucking compliments. They should be compliments. Ah, you do not substitute fish for chips, you shithead. Anyways, well, fuck it. Okay, let's move along. So, people speaking out sometimes. I can't get distracted. Okay, which of the following represents the same preferences of this utility function? So we have a utility function here, fish minus capital A times chips to the power of alpha, okay? Which is functional as long as f is larger than a. So basically we're saying that this sort of coefficient at the front, this constant, has to be positive. Otherwise, you know, we'll just say utility is 0. So we're basically saying you don't get negative utility out of this, it's just not possible. Okay, so we're now asked, which of the following represent the same preferences over the range f larger than a? And we're given 3 utility functions. So we're given this first one, we're given this second one, then we're given this third one. Now, if you were to actually try this one out, then you could see that this is actually... wonder if I can actually write on... Can I get my whiteboard out? Yeah. Okay, well, regardless. If you were to take the logs of this function, so you took the log of both sides, and then you sort of separated these out, you would get something very similar to this. However, they did put 1 plus a underneath, 1 plus alpha underneath, and I don't really know how. But in short, this is the correct answer. There is also another way of proving it, which is what I've done, which is comparing their marginal rates of substitution. And what you should get is the same marginal rate of substitution between both utility functions, because the marginal rate of substitution basically says, how does this curve? And if it curves in the same way, then it's the same function. So you can see here, I've just taken the marginal utility of f and c for both of these, and you end up with c over alpha bracket f minus a, close bracket. And that's the case. Okay. Now, given that now we've got the MRS between fish and chips, we need to use it to explain if preferences are homothetic or quasi-linear. Now, they're neither, okay? They're neither. Now, I'll tell you how you can test this. So, homothetic, I've showed you how to test this before. You can just sub in f for c or c for f and try to cancel. And in this case, it doesn't work. If I put f in place of c here, okay, and I expanded everything out, I couldn't really cancel it because, sure, it would be alpha f minus alpha a, which I can't really cancel an f out of because it's only on one variable, and it would be f at the top. I can't cancel out anything there. So it's not homothetic. Now, it's also not going to be quasi-linear, because quasi-linear you can test by holding one of them constant and seeing if the MRS is still constant when f changes, basically. We saw how it could work for previously, because if I held... Okay, so for example, in the quasi-linear example here, if I held q... well, hold on, wait. Yeah, so this is... Yeah, so if I held, for example, one of these constants, okay, and I could do along an axis, okay, so it would just be moving along an axis. then I should have the same MRS, essentially. That should be the case. So in this case, if I held C constant and varied F, I should have the same MRS, but it's not the case in either case, really. If I hold C constant and vary F, the MRS changes. If I hold F constant and vary C, the MRS changes. So it's not quasi-linear either. So no, neither homothetic nor quasi-linear. Next is show that indifference curves of the general form f equals a plus k c to the power of negative a. This is pretty easy. You just take the utility function, but you're setting utility as some constant, okay? Remember, indifference curves are curves of constant utility, okay? So if I set this as just capital K and then rearrange, so I have capital K here, you sort of see how I do it here. So I've rearranged it. I've moved C over to the other side. You can do C negative alpha because you've divided it. And so that's going to give you the negative alpha there, which is going to be equal to F minus A. And you just move over the A and you've got your indifference curve. How lovely. So it's going to represent, K here is going to represent the level of utility given by our indifference curve. So if it's 1, then the max we can gain on our indifference curve is 1 utility. And then if it's 10, then it's 10 utilities, okay? So that's pretty easy to understand. Now, use this expression to show that preferences are also convex. Now, you can also prove convexity by showing that the second derivative is positive for all the values of C in the indifference curves. And if we derive this twice, well, then we get this expression, alpha squared plus alpha times k over c to the power of alpha plus 2. Which is always positive because alpha is always positive, as we can see here, and C is always positive because it's quite hard to get negative chips. It's a good rule for life. Chips are never negative. Chips are always a positive. They're fucking great. Anyway, so the indifference curves are convex, so we're all good. Now, if total budget is Y and prices are PF and PC, then find the Marshallian demands. Now, getting demands is where this starts to become quite tricky, because demands is just a bit shit, really. But Marshallian demands, you can think of it as like a Lagrangian, okay? Now, if I go back, is this number 5 or is this number 3? I mean 4. I can't count. You don't need counting for this degree. Who gives a shit? Yeah, so this bit at the end of number 4 is quite good, because it tells you the relationships between all of them, okay? Now, in order to get Marshallian demands, which are also known as uncompensated demands, we need to think about the utility maximization problem. Now, what we need to do is maximize utility relative to the budget constraint. And so we can set up a Lagrangian like that. So we know our expression for utility, and we also now know, because of the information we've just given, our expression for budget, which we're going to put a lambda in front of and just throw in there. Now, in order to find the utility maximizing values of all of fish and chips, we're going to need to do a Lagrangian for fish, chips, and the lambda. And by doing this Lagrangian, we just get the first order conditions, which are going to be equal to 0, of course. There's a lot more calculations here. In fact, I had to do quite a lot of calculations. I'm not going to show all of them, just because it would be a bit complicated for me to explain every single step. But basically, if you take these first order conditions, okay, divide them by each other, rearrange for F and C, then once you've got both of those expressions, you can put them into the budget constraint. You can then get an expression in terms of just budget and prices for C and F, okay? You guys are all smart, you know what the deal is, but if you want a quick thing for your Marshallian demands, these are them. C is equal to Y plus A P F, price of fish, over the price of chips plus price of chips over alpha. Now, fish is going to be equal to total budget minus alpha A price of fish over alpha price of fish plus price of fish. Ta-da! So that's that, okay? There's more complicated calculations here. I hope you can get to it, but that's where I'm going to stop at. Okay, for number 2, we have a similar thing. I feel like someone here was really hungry, because like both of these, this is about fish and chips, and this is about meat, vegetables, and fruit. Like, was this person just like starving and they're just like, oh, I have to have fucking lunch, and they just wrote about food because they couldn't think of anything else? I choose to believe that. Okay, so an individual with a total budget of Y spends it on meat, Q1, at price P1, vegetables Q2 at price P2, and fruit Q3 at price P3. So we've got the prices and quantities of meats, vegetables, and fruit. It is proposed... What? It is proposed to model their preferences... It is proposed... What a weird phrasing. To model their preferences, we use an indirect utility function. This. Okay. So we've got this indirect utility function here, which is... I've represented in sort of like a nicer way here. Which is... It's... Oh, wait. I've represented it up here. You can't really see that, can you? Oh, wait. Hold on. Yeah. There we go. Okay. What's that? All right. So... we are also told to assume this. This'll... You don't really see the relevance of this at the start, but it'll come to play later. So, the most important thing here, what is the corresponding expenditure function? Does it have the right homogeneity properties with respect to its arguments? Now, looking at this, it may seem kind of odd how you can get a corresponding expenditure function out of this, but there's a trick. You can use the indirect utility function to get the expenditure function. Now, if you're... Oh god, bubble popped in my throat, pardon me. You can use any indirect utility function to gain the... Oh god. Yeah, to gain the expenditure function. And look here. This is why. The arguments are inverses of each other. So, if I put a expenditure function alongside the prices into the indirect utility function, it'll equal V, right? Now, using this information, what I did is that I put the expenditure function, which you put in place of Y here, because think of it, Y is total budget and C is total expenditure, which is how, so it's total of how much I can spend, and C is total of what I do spend. It's going to be sort of similar. Plus, it's just replacing Y. You do just replace Y. And then we put this in. Okay, so we've got now expenditure, and then we've put that in equals V, so which is our level of utility. And if we just rearrange, then we can get our expenditure function, which here is V times P1 plus P2 minus P1 plus P2 squared over P3. Now we're sort of starting to see why Y has to be larger than this here. Because if Y was smaller, well then we'd have basically negative expenditure. Doesn't really work. So yeah, has to be larger. Okay, so we've done that. Does it have the right homogeneity properties? Now, if you look at the details of the expenditure function, you can see right here, it is homogeneous of degree 1 in its prices. Okay, so let's test that. Okay, so we do a lambda in front of the prices. Okay, and then we've got now this. Okay, and if we just simplify out, then you can see that, yeah, actually, we do get homogeneity degree 1 of our prices. So, yeah, the condition is proven. We've got the right homogeneity properties with respect to the arguments. It's all good. Okay, now, here's 3 sort of short but slightly complicated things. So, which goods are luxuries and which are necessities? So, here, we don't really have a measure for budget, but we do have a measure for general utility. Now, if we want to sort of... Oh god, what the fuck has happened here? What happened here? Oh, fuck. Yeah, it also says establish the compensated demands for each of the goods. Okay. Now, how you establish compensated demands is quite simple. You just use Shepards Lever. Shepards Lever basically says, if I partially derive the expenditure function with respect to the price of good 1, for example, I'll get the compensated demand for good 1. Quite a useful thing to know. So you just use Shepards Lever, and we get the 3 compensated demand functions. You can also notice that the compensated demand functions for good 1 and good 2 are identical, because, well, yeah, pretty much. I don't think I should really explain that, because, like, well, no, I will. So you see here, if I derive with respect to price 1, I'd get the same thing as if I derived from respect to price 2, because they're added together and they're both playing the same role. So yeah, I'm going to get the same sort of thing. So if you want to pause a bit, take a look at those. Those are our sort of compensated demand functions. Okay. Now, which one of them are luxuries and which are necessities? So if we want to think about luxuries and necessities, we can think of luxuries are something that we're going to buy more of if our total utility goes up, right? So if we're allowed like a total high level of utility, then I want to devote that towards stuff that I'm going to like, right? So that's a luxury. Okay? But when we come to necessities, well, we don't need them as much. So we're going to reduce the expenditure of necessities, or they're going to be held constant, basically. Think of it like food, you know? You don't really buy too much more food when you have an increase in utility. You usually just keep food expenditure constant, right? This has some exceptions, but we're going to gloss over that a little bit now. But you can see here that for good 1 and good 2, if I increase that V, the demand for those goods is going to go up necessarily, because I'm going to increase that total level of utility that I can have. I'm going to increase my demand of these two goods. But for good 3, there's no V in there. In fact, it did get, literally derived out. So we now know that the expenditure on good 3 doesn't change with total utility. Therefore, good 3 is a necessity because it just doesn't change with the utility cap. Okay, so now we have to think about whether compensated own price effects for these goods are non-positive. Now that's a lot of fucking fancy words. And yeah, it's fucking cool. I think this is in week 3. Let me check. Is it in week 3? Where did week 3 go? Oh, there it is. Is it in, let's see, compensated? No. Okay, well, in short, compensated own price effects are basically just the partial derivative of the compensated demand function with respect to its own price. So for compensated demand function for good 1, it's just price 1, basically. So you repeat this for all 3. You get the same thing for 1 and 2, again, because they're pretty much identical. And then you get a different thing for 3. Yeah, so these are the compensated own price effects, okay? So another way of sort of saying compensated own price effects, which is a kind of a long and disgusting phrase, is the effect of changing the price of good 1 on the demand for good 1, okay? So here, we see that good 1 doesn't even factor into it. It's only good 3. And same thing for good 2, okay? There's literally no effect on any of them. And in this case, they're always going to be positive because, well, we're not going to demand a negative amount of good 3 ever, really. So, yeah, they're always positive. But for good 3, it's always going to be negative because both terms on here are positive and it's negative overall. So the own price effect for 3 is going to be negative. Now, this also corresponds with their definitions of luxuries and necessities. We generally demand more luxuries as prices, rise. Well, yeah, we demand more of the luxury as the price rises, but it levels out. So, for example, if price 3 gets to a very high amount, then the change is going to be very small, okay? If it changes a very little bit, then the change is going to be, well, yeah, if the price is quite small, then its change is magnified, basically. But yeah, and here it's, yeah, I think that's as much as I can say, really. Which of the 3 pairs of goods are complements and which are substitutes for each other? Now, goods 1 and 2 are substitutes because you see they've basically got the same compensated demand functions. They've got the same compensated own price effects. They're basically substitutes for each other, okay? If I bought more of 1 or more of 2, it wouldn't really matter, okay? However, when we think about good 1 and good 3, or good 2 and good 3, they are complements, okay? They are complements to each other, okay? Which is because the price of good 3, okay, if I was to raise the price of good 3, the demand for goods 1 and 2 is going to go down, really. Actually, no, sorry. This is a bad example. Let's... ooh. Wait, I think I've made a fuck up here. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, I'm pausing for a second. I think I was right. So yeah, if the price of good 3 does go up, all right, you can see price of P3 goes up. This is going to reduce this overall here on the right-hand side, which means we're reducing what we're minusing here, which means it's going to get larger. So, oh, wait, no, I've... goes up. Damn it. No, I do need to check it again. Pardon me. I'm back. Okay, I was wrong. So goods 1 and 2 here are complements because, okay, so let me go through it. A complement is something that if the price of one good goes up, the quantity demanded of the other good is going to go down. Okay? Because if you think about it, okay, if the price of socks goes up, then I'm not really going to buy... Actually, no, that's bad. If the cost of shoes goes up, then I'm not buying many socks because what's the use for socks if I don't have shoes to wear them in? So goods 1 and 2, if I was to increase the price here, this term on the right gets larger, I demand less of good 1. Okay? Same thing here for good 2. Basically, they're complements to each other. So, but when it comes to good 3, the quantity demanded of goods 1, it is a substitute. Okay? Because the higher the price rises in P3, the more we're going to demand of goods 1 and 2. Okay? The more goods 1 and 2 we're going to get if we get good 3. I think good 3 was fruit. So if the price of fruit goes up, then I'm going to buy more meat and vegetables to compensate. Because I'm not eating as much fruit, so I'm just going to buy the others too to make up for it. Okay? Yeah, okay, now I think that's right. Okay. I think that's it. I don't think I need to explain much else. Hopefully that was helpful. Oh, just a small little announcement. The quant catch-up sessions, they're still going on. We've got a better room this time. We've got a Bentham house in the basement. Well, not the basement. It's called Lower Ground. Makes it sound fancier. But yeah, we've got a room. Feel free to come along and chill out. And there's biscuits as well. So yeah, hope you guys have a nice reading week. Hope this didn't stress you out too much. And yeah, hope you have a nice day. Okay, bye.